Okay, we are recording. I don't know, if you're watching this and you're not very satisfied with the picture, let me know and I'll come and talk to you. I'm going to talk about the pedagogy of care, and my starting point for picking this is a quote that I came across online from someone called Kate Denial, and she is an education academic based in the States, and I thought, I read her article, blog post, which is about pedagogy of something else, a bit like care. I can't remember, it's gone straight out of my head. That's good, isn't it? That's really good. Sorry about that for the recording. But this really struck home for me, because I thought this is very similar to how I feel, or how I have been feeling. So it says, I was urged to be on the lookout for plagiarism, to be vigilant for cheaters, to assume students wouldn't do the reading, to expect to be treated as a cog in a consumerist machine by students who would challenge their grades on a whim. And that feels and felt very familiar, the way that we would think about our students and about the relationship we would have with them, about the idea of students as consumers and so on. So one thing that I kind of took from that is we need to be really careful about the stories we tell and who we tell them to. That telling this sort of story, particularly to people that are new to teaching or new to the institution, is a very dangerous thing for me to do. The other thing that it prompted me to do is to rethink the kind of relationship I wanted to have for students. And to base that around what I think is likely to be most effective in helping them learn. So this is the question, and in thinking about this, reading Kate's blog, reading a number of other blogs and posts on the subject, rereading a piece that I'm going to refer to later by a woman called Nell Noddings, who is someone whose writing I've used in other contexts, conjured up kind of images of professional, trust, supportive, effective, fair. These are all words that kind of describe the sort of relationship that I wanted to have, thinking about good teaching as being defined by the effectiveness of the relationship that's fostered with students, that we're doing our job well when we're creating a relationship with students that's helping them learn. Anything else that we do isn't really effective teaching. And no matter what we're doing, if our students aren't learning, then our teaching isn't being effective. And that's rather complicated, and there are lots of responsibilities within that, some of which I hope to kind of pick up. What I've done is kind of base some of my thoughts around a philosophy called the ethics of care. This is something that I encountered probably for the first time about 7 or 8 years ago, when I did a one-off talk session for student nurses, I think. Since then I've used it in a number of contexts, principally looking at management of health and social care. It's a feminist ethical theory based around relationships. So there are 3 defining features that I think apply to the way that I'm thinking about pedagogy. The first is what is rather grandly called a relational ontology, but really what we mean by that is that human beings are fundamentally connected to one another, and that our effort and our attention needs to be on creating the right sort of relationship. We're social animals. One of the most problematic things we can do is to base our thinking around the idea of independence. So trying to create people that are independent, I think is a very dangerous thing to do, because realistically I don't think anybody is independent. Even those of us who are independent scholars are basing our work on the work of other people. We're collaborating all the time, either directly in our conversations or through the writing that we do or through presentations, conferences, and so on. It's certainly not true of students at whatever level. It's not true in public life. It's not true in our social lives. the ethic of care is fostered on the idea of creating strong, healthy relationships between individuals. The second element of this is attentiveness. Nell Noddings describes this as a deliberate regard for the expressed needs of the person that we care for. So paying very close attention to what it is that the people that we're trying to establish a healthy relationship with need. I have an example from an article she wrote about teaching, as well as writing about care, social care. Nell Noddings also writes about education. I'm going to read this. It is a little bit long and it looks awful on this screen. When a teacher works conscientiously, perhaps very hard to help her students succeed, we often give her moral credit for caring. She seems to know what her students need and acts faithfully on those beliefs. However, those are assumed needs rather than expressed needs, and these teachers are often remembered as saying, "Someday you'll thank me for this." I've called such teachers virtue carers. They don't establish caring relationships or engage in caring for, as described in care ethics. The point about this is that most people in teaching are trying to do the right thing. They're often making assumptions about what their students need from them as a teacher in very good faith and are acting in a good manner in doing so. The point about this, though, is she's saying these people aren't paying close attention to what the students really need from us. And so whilst we're trying to do a good thing and we're being virtuous, we're not achieving the sort of attentiveness that we need in order to foster these relationships. The third element, the third defining feature is power imbalances. So I think this pedagogy of care demands that we attempt to disarm parts of the system that sustain power imbalances unnecessarily. There are some power imbalances that are necessary to the sort of system that we're in. For example, we as lecturing staff have to have a power over students in the sense of assessing them and marking their work, grading their work will be one element where there's a necessary imbalance in terms of power. What I think we need to pay much closer attention to are elements of the system which strip students of power and take away from them the ability for them to control and shape their own education and to profit from their own education. What I intend to do is to have a look at four, what I'm calling opportunities to demonstrate care. Two of which are University of Suffolk policies that I think are particularly problematic, at least in the way they're being implemented, and two are just slightly more sort of general points. Individually, these are small things, but the point is that they add up to a student experience which I think is not as helpful, not as caring as it could be, and one of the problems with that is that it's fostering a lack of trust between lecturing staff and students that is manifested in the kind of feelings that were in that first quote. The students are here to cheat the system. Some students will cheat the system. Students are here to instrumentally get the best grades that they want, not really interested in learning, those sorts of things. I'm suggesting those feelings come because we've got a system that is not trusting students. So, I've got a handout. So it's not a very exciting handout. It's got two extracts on it that I'm going to have a look at. One is a copy of the email that is sent to students if they are absent for 7 days. The other is 3 sections of paragraphs from the extenuating circumstances policy. So, enjoy. These will, I guess these are familiar to everyone. I'm afraid that with people that I don't know in the room, I'm just assuming that you are lecturing staff.
Yeah, we are new.
You're new lecturing staff, you're very welcome. So, let's have a look at the absence email. The first thing I think we should remember, this is a 7-day absence. In practice, on some courses, that could be 1 day. Students have missed 1 day, then they get this email, right? The questions that I got for this are about this sort of assumptions that underpin this email and whether or not we're demonstrating trust to our students. I think the way in which this is written is not giving students the message that I think we all want to send with this, which is, I know you'd like to be at university, I hope everything's okay, please let me know if there's anything that I can do. I know that we all think that, it's an assumption, but my assumption is we want to help our students. The reason we send absence emails is not because we want to bully our students into attending. They are adults who are free to choose to attend or not attend. In signing up for university, in signing up to £27,000 of debt, my assumption is those students want to be at university. If they can't be, then something's happened. It could be that they're ill, it could be that their child's ill, their car's broken down, the train was cancelled, all sorts of things might get in their way. But we certainly don't need to be bullying them after a week in the way that I think we are. I've highlighted this section which says attendance is a vital component to student success. Are we assuming that students don't understand that? We're assuming that students don't know that coming to university and coming to class is going to help them be successful. I know that we have students, and I've spoken to students who think they don't need to attend, who think I can pass this course by reading the books or studying the library. Those students are in a very, very small minority, I think. Most students, I think, absolutely understand that attending is a good thing. The other section that I think it's worth just having a look at is in bold, and honestly I can't remember if it's in bold on the email or not. My suspicion is it might be. It says, please note, continued non-attendance and non-engagement with your course can result in you being withdrawn from the course. So after 1 week of non-attending, which could be 1 day, we're threatening students with withdrawing them from the course. These could be level 4 students in their 2nd or 3rd week who are very nervous about being at university, already feeling uncertain about whether they want to be here or not, whether they think this is the right place for them, maybe they feel they're not like the other students. You know, in our programs we have students that are a bit older than some of the other students who take a little time to sort of settle in. They feel a little bit out of place. And we're threatening them with withdrawal. Those of us that have been here a little bit of time know how hard a student has to work in order to be withdrawn. The reality is, you know, it takes more than missing a couple of sessions for you to be withdrawn, or really to be in any significant danger of being withdrawn. So it feels to me like this is an example of us having just kind of somehow lost our direction a little bit. That our intent is good, the attendance monitoring system, the regular contact with students, the way it escalates is all done with good intention, but we've kind of missed the point a little bit. That we're not engaging with the students and giving them the right message here, that actually we're engaging, we're sending you these emails because we care and because there may be things that we can do. We want to work with you to help you catch up with whatever it is that you've missed. So, absence email. Second one, and this is, I feel really strongly about extenuating circumstances. There are elements of this policy which I think, at least in the way it's written, this policy is basically about we don't trust students. This policy is more or less about we don't trust you to be adults and to manage your time and your deadlines. And if we're not really strict with deadlines, then all students are going to be out to cheat the system. I totally accept if we were freer with the way that we dealt with extenuating circumstances, there would be 1 or 2 students who would deliberately play the system in order to take advantage. I get that. But I think it's better to permit some students to play the system and to support the vast majority of students rather than to operate a much more draconian system. So our working assumption is students will cheat the system unless we make it really difficult for them to do so. We do that by making very big demands on evidence, having very tough rules which incidentally don't apply to us. And that's the other side of it. That any one of us, if we're feeling unwell, can go to our boss and say, I'm feeling a little bit unwell, I know that we agreed I was going to do this work by tomorrow, actually, can I do it for next week? They're not asking for doctor's notes, they're not asking for evidence. The circumstances in which we get flexibility at work are far broader than the ones that we offer to students. That's not unique to our workplace. That's just working life in most organisations. Most of the jobs that we're preparing students for will treat them in a very different way to the way that we're treating labour demands. So there's sort of two problems. One is that our working assumption is wrong. The second is that we're treating students much more harshly than we're treating ourselves. There's also a cost to providing evidence. When we demand doctor's notes or certificates, often surgeries charge for that. And that might not be an insignificant amount of money. We are putting students at massive inconvenience at a time when they're telling us they're under a great deal of pressure, whether it's family pressures, they're not feeling well, whatever the circumstances are, we're putting them to additional inconvenience, we're placing bureaucratic demands on them, and we're making that situation worse rather than better. And by flipping the system and by saying, actually our working assumption is that we're going to trust what you say. If you tell us you're unwell, then I'm really sorry, I hope you feel better soon. What can we do to ease the pressure on you? What can we do to help you achieve? The other assumption is that we assume our students can meet the bureaucratic expectations we have. When we have students that come from other parts of the world, it might be that it is not possible to provide the sort of evidence that we demand. We've seen that around things like death certificates, which I think is a particularly objectionable requirement that we have. But we have students where English is a second language, they're coming, their home country will be one where English is not spoken, they may not be able to provide evidence in English, they may have different processes, different norms, different certifications that just don't meet our requirements. And we are saying to students, you must meet our demands, meet our requirements, or else we're not going to provide you with help.
Exactly what you said. Last Monday, I attended the extenuating circumstance meeting just to observe, and there was typically a case like this, student abroad, and the evidence they are requiring is from abroad. I had to intervene and say, it's just not going to be possible. And it was all about this section of the policy, so this is so pertinent. I really had to argue the students' case and say that this is not possible.
No, and if we're
trying from abroad too, and I can imagine where this student was coming from would be worse than where I came from, and I wouldn't be able to provide the evidence they are asking.
And probably you wouldn't be expected to. You know, if you said, if you asked for some leave because a family member had passed away, no one, for example, is going to. No one, for example, would ask you for a death certificate.
I think that's. I mean, I think you make a very valid point about, do we start from the position that everybody's out to cheat the system, therefore we put the highest levels of evidence, or do we assume we have a trusting relationship and everybody starts out well, and we, just to say, I've got a death in the family, that's enough. We don't so insensitive to ask for any more.
Right.
And the only time that you change is if you have reason to believe at any point that trust isn't there. Then you find out that all 4 grandparents have died 4 times, sort of thing. Obviously you want a high level of evidence.
Absolutely, and I think we could have a system that had that kind of sensitivity to it.
I think the thing you find with where bureaucracies take over, when one person cheats the system, they put something in place to manage that one person that affects everybody.
Right, exactly, absolutely. We spend a lot of time in recruitment, open days. We've got an open day on Saturday. Fly out to parts of the world and say, look, the reason you should come to the University of Suffolk is we're supportive, we've got great student services. We do have great support, we do have great learning services, do have great student support. But I'm not sure that what we've got here is evidence of an organisation committed to supporting students' ambitions to study.
I play devil's advocate here then, and I do the favour of. One of the reasons why this system is what it is based on differential practice, quite different practice in terms of when we were free to give extensions and not give extensions. And a lot of the students who are not in receipt of those extensions complain, quite rightly, because they saw it as being unfair. Now, that's not necessarily a strong argument against what you're saying, because I do see what you're saying, but it's making me think in terms of, okay, should there not be a system? I don't think you're saying that, but to what degree? There has to be checks, balances in terms of equity, because that's part of care. It's not just about, talking about, let's say, an individual. We need to care about the others and how they are going to respond.
So what I would suggest is that differentiation is not necessarily a problem. So students in different...
I think it is in the eyes of the students, though.
Well, students who have different circumstances being treated differently, that seems entirely fair.
Oh, sorry, in that sense,
Students who present one argument to one course team, for example, and a student presenting a similar argument to another course team being treated differently, that I agree that would be a problem.
Yeah.
Students being treated in an over-lenient way, I agree that would be a problem, but I don't think that's a necessary conclusion of what I'm suggesting.
No,
there does need to be a system, but it doesn't need to be this one, I think.
But even if you take the one that you've got there, the one we've been talking about, if you've got somebody who's, you've got every reason that they're trustworthy and they say they've got a funeral, then you say, yeah, absolutely, I understand that.
Yeah.
And then you find that somebody is using that as if they know they can get out of it, and then they say, oh no, I had a funeral, and I don't see that the answer is to treat everybody like that they're alive. Let's use that.
Oh, I get that. But then how do we actually manage that?
But this is a life skill, isn't it? My wife went to a new job last week and said, "Can I do some work at home?" Because travelling she travels into Norwich and traffic's terrible. Can I work at home for 2 hours? Come in later? Yeah. And they said no, because we'd have to let everybody do that. And I'm just thinking, that's not the best way to get out of your staff. Yeah. It's not the best way to get good work out of your students either.
Well, and the short answer to that is no, you don't have to let everybody do that.
You
can treat people differently as long as you can explain why you're treating them differently. Yeah.
I was just going to add that we do the ethnic diversity training as a mandatory training, and that is what the essence of it is all about, isn't it? Treating people differently because of the different needs of those people.
But I would argue, that the system is designed to do that through the way that applications are dealt with.
No, I mean like extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
I think that you do have to give, because as a student, so as well as being a member of staff, I've been a student here, and I had this situation where I had 4 deaths in 2 years, a very close member, so it was like the majority of my calls. And not only do you have to provide a death certificate, but you have to say in quite a lot of detail about how that death has affected you. And if when you're feeling incredibly low, you don't want to put on there necessarily that you feel low and you feel rubbish and that you're grieving and that life is too much and you can't cope. Yeah. Because that's basically what the university are wanting, but some people aren't able and don't want to admit that.
No, absolutely.
And I think, so it's not just about the evidence, it's also the dialogue that has to go on the form. It's too much. Almost, a certificate should be enough. Yeah. It can't be both things. If you want evidence, you then can't say, well, now just tell us in 3,000 words why this is affecting you. Yeah. Because that's too much.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, can I share with you what I do with another centre? And that's we allow the tutor to have discretion to provide permission to have extenuating circumstances for 2 weeks. And if it's beyond that time, then it would go to the extenuating circumstances committee.
And that was our old system.
Ah, right. Okay.
And as Robert sort of alluded to, what we saw was that some course teams applied it in one way and other course teams applied it in another way. The third thing is about encouraging behaviours that we claim to value. So I think these are things that we're trying to encourage in our students, that we say that we want in our students, but we're not really permitting them to do. So things like self-management and kind of planning their own learning, taking responsibility for their own learning, managing their time. I think these are things that we're getting in the way of when we say to students, well, actually, there are limits on those that we're imposing through the bureaucracy that we've created. This is a quote from a woman called Amy Hasselhoff. I think this is a really good quote because I read it and I was instantly really embarrassed. It says, when I began teaching, I focused on content and rigour. I made the rookie mistake of designing the first course in ways that would have worked perfectly for me as a student. The problem was that prep school had made me into a different kind of college student than the ones in front of me, who mostly came from underfunded public schools, returned after years away, worked full-time, supported families. I'm really conscious of that. So I went to a private school. I'm not the first in my family to go into higher education. I'm not the first in an extended family to have a PhD. I also have a natural aptitude for some of the things that I teach. That, I assume, is true of all of us, right? That we're good at the things that we teach. And there's a risk, we were talking about this yesterday, there's a risk of, because we're good at these things, we teach it in a way assuming everybody has the same kind of inclinations, interests, skills, aptitudes, or however you want to put it, that we have. And actually we forget that our students struggle with things that we find really easy because we happen to be good at them and we happen to have been doing them for, I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 40 years, whatever. So I think what she's, the thing that she's saying here is that we have to take student needs and desires into account. She's not saying we have to give in to them, but we do have to acknowledge the concerns and really think hard about what our students are bringing into the classroom. It's painful, and a guy called Barrow said, look, it's painful to have a hard-working student with whom one's worked hard to foster a close working relationship and then to have them fail. But that is part of the job. So we have to create the circumstances in which a student can succeed, accepting that some students won't succeed, even though we've done everything we possibly can. But what Hasselhoff's saying, I think, is that we've got to be cautious about how we design our programs and our courses, not to design them for us, because through what we're interested in, what we think we would value.
I agree, and Will and I were having this conversation yesterday because I teach marketing and I like non-profit marketing. So I made my students do a non-profit case study for 30% of their assignment. But then I said, okay, the 70%, the second one, you're allowed to choose somebody that makes money. That's fine. I'm not against people making money, luxury goods, unenvironmentally. I was really conscious that I would have them all working in non-profit. That's not fair. And that's my take on it.
The last thing I wanted to do is sort of address the potential criticism that what I'm suggesting is that we just do whatever our students want, that we're sort of coddling our students, that we're not treating them in a realistic way. I think there is a requirement for us to respond to the situation, the needs of individual students, but that doesn't mean to say that we have to give in to every demand. We're professionals with professional expertise. It is absolutely okay for us to say no, say that's not possible, it's not acceptable. No one is suggesting we need to accept, I put mediocrity, I'm not sure that's the right word, because I think we probably do have to accept mediocrity. But no one's saying that we should
have to go down to the lowest common denominator.
Right, so we don't have to dumb everything down. We're not going to the lowest common denominator. No one is saying we can't fail students. As long as we have created an environment in which students can succeed, and that we've really done that. And I think we say a lot about that, but possibly we're not really delivering on that. And I think that what I'm talking about, but what I'm talking about is better than trying to aim to satisfy the whim of customers. And it's a sort of response to that kind of customer, students as a customer idea, that here we're creating an environment in which students can succeed. We talked about the idea of the university as a gym before, but I think this is about the environment and the circumstance in which students encounter their learning and come to university. Here are some references. Good student. Kate Denial, Pedagogy of Kindness, that's what her thing was called. There's a link at the bottom here. This is a blog post that I wrote, which same sort of subject, most of the same content. not the stuff about the university policies. That's unwise to put on an open blog post, I think. But I do think it's a conversation that we need to have within the university. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, you know, how easy would it be for us to set up an experiment in which we did this differently? So to say, for example, next year for our level 5 students, we're going to remove the monitoring, we're going to remove the deadlines for students. We're going to operate with suggested hand-ins, but if you can't hand it in then, you hand it in when you can. There'll have to be a cut-off because we have to get through boards.
It's a 3-week term as well, which gets difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, but I mean, I think it works both ways. If we give students that flexibility, they have to accept there to be a degree of flexibility.
You could take 3 weeks from the deadline.
It might be easy for us to say, actually, if things are coming in smaller bunches, I don't want to say drips and drabs, but then actually turning around might be a bit easier.
To moderate it all.
Yeah. I mean, there are problems with it, but it would be interesting to see whether student performance is better, student satisfaction is better, their engagement's better, if we just relax some of these rules and we give students a degree more kind of trust and responsibility for supporting these things. I don't know whether anyone would allow that. I'm going to sit down now.
So, would I say the before slide, as you said, like a student as a customer. Now, obviously in theory they are paying money to us or something, but could we not actually, use this word? Because in most of the cases, actually, we don't need to think about they are our customer, because as long as we see or we thinking they are our customer, I think they are taking the advantage in this word. So can we avoid in anyhow?
Well, this is what I'm saying, is that the approach that I'm suggesting and this way of thinking about what it means to be effective as a teacher, lecturer, academic, however you want to describe it, I think I am saying we're not treating them as customers. We're encountering them in a lecturer-student relationship, but that's one which is fostered on trust, attentiveness, the understanding that the relationship is important and therefore we need to pay attention to what that relationship is, and that it's not one of customer and retailer. You know, it's not that relationship at all.
No, and again, my aha moment from all this is that key word you said several times about trust.
Yeah.
And the problem is that with some of my students, we have a phenomenal trusting relationship, and that's not an issue.
Yeah.
But some of them, there is no trust at all. They come to the university not with no trust, but almost, if there is such a thing, well, yeah, minus trust would be a paranoia, if you like.
Right.
They come like that. And I don't even sometimes know how to get them from where they are to the first step of even beginning to trust. Now, how I have to work with that student is very different to the person who I've got lots of trust with. I like Brené Brown's stuff on building trust. Have you seen that with the marbles in the jar? It's quite a good picture.
Right.
And she says, how do we build trust in the classroom? It's lots of little things. So each time a little thing is done, or we've done what we said we would, or we've done it in a kind way.
Right, and that is precisely my issue with this.
Yeah. Though, I mean, these are taking handfuls of marbles out of that jar, as opposed to putting them in. At a time when you could put loads in, you know, having the right response to people in these circumstances, we take them out.
I think there are lots of ways in which we can think about it. You know, the way that we have a conversation around referencing, for example. If we center our conversation with referencing around plagiarism and stealing other people's, you know, I don't think any of our students, or very, very small number of students, are deliberately going out to cheat. People who sit on misconduct panels, you know, we see a lot of poor practice. We see a lot of students who don't really know what they're supposed to do, having a go and failing. You know, taking block quotes, not referencing them properly, not putting in quote marks, you know, and that's poor practice. That's not a student who's trying to cheat. You know, if you're trying to cheat, I think our students would do a better job. they're all more
I know I would.
Yeah. So, you know, I think that referencing conversation can be reframed about acknowledging that we are, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So that everybody is using other people's work in order to foster what they do. You know, that all this content here is based on some stuff other people have said. and it's only fair we give them credit for that, and also about how you build a strong argument. That you need to back up a strong argument with a solid team around you, and that we do that by putting good references in. And I wonder whether that's a better way to have that conversation, one which is not, every time you inadvertently suggest that students might be cheating, I think there's a marble coming out. And if we can't put marbles in, at the very least we should stop taking them out.
Yeah. There does come a point where we need to stick with the analogy in terms of take marbles out, in terms of sticking with plagiarism.
No, you never take trust. You never take the trust out. You use the trust to go on a very difficult journey.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
As I said, to go back to the point, in terms of, there comes a point where if, let's say, you have the right conversation in terms of the first year, then if a student is doing the same thing in the second year, or we've had cases where students have multiple, kind of found guilty of plagiarism, then how does that equate to trust and care in the round?
Well,
because it's easy to talk about building relationships on a one-to-one, but if you're a class of 40, 50, 60, 80...
I think it's about setting expectations right from the start.
Yeah,
I mean, in my first sessions with students, I don't ever talk about myself as the lecturer and then the student. I always talk about myself as a learning partner, and my expectations are this, and then I ask them what their expectations are, and then I clarify how we're going to work together. It's a relationship, it's a give and take, we need to communicate, and if one of us breaks that relationship, then we have to repair it again, and by plagiarism or whatever conversation we're having, potentially, that's something that we just need to overcome.
I mean, I get all of that. I understand defining words and not anti-defining words. But it's the practice in relation to the context within which we operate and the time and the workloads and the student numbers. We can't, operate all this stuff as if it's in a vacuum.
No.
I get what you're saying. In fact, I practice what you say, so I don't be told that.
Yeah.
I think there's this, the example of a student who sort of persistently fails to reference properly. I think we'd need strong evidence before we'd be happy to say they're deliberately cheating. There's something else going on.
I mean, but we know, okay, we're doing this example, we both know...
Oh, there will be students who do, right? I absolutely accept that, but I think it's much more likely, actually, the students who want to cheat will go and buy an essay, and it'll be submitted, and it'll never get caught in the reference on the plagiarism software, because it'll be too well written. So...
I mean, trust is quite an easy word to use.
Yeah.
We're all using it, but in terms of trying to define what that is through actions, the words in themselves are kind of meaningless as what you do. And part of trust is not just in terms of putting stuff back in the jar, it's also having to take stuff out when it's appropriate to do so in terms of the student body and how they perceive things.
Well, I think we need, for example, with the referencing thing, I think we need to be really clear.
Oh, yeah.
And we let students down when we are, at level 4 or even at level 5, when we're not following through on this idea that you have to reference. For example, yesterday I marked the first piece of work a student had done. It's actually quite well written. It's a little bit brief. She said a lot of really good things. There's no references. There's no citations, no reference list, and it fails. She has to have another go at it because it's really important. She does. She understands that that's what's necessary.
Yeah.
I don't think for one moment that she's deliberately kind of cheated. That would be an odd approach to have taken. But we could have said, well, it's the first piece of work, it's actually quite good, she said a lot of the right things. Actually, the content doesn't need changing, other than the fact she just needs to show us where she's got her information from. We'll pass it, we'll give it 40%, we'll give her some strong feedback, and I'm sure she won't do it again. But actually, I think that is doing her a disservice, and that does come back to saying, look, we don't need to accept, maybe mediocrity is not the right word. That relationship is about saying, look, if we're going to trust you not to deliberately cheat academically or cheat the system, we're still in a position where we have to say and give honest feedback in the
Do we know why that happened today? Because I want to backtrack and see what went wrong in that process.
No, and that's like what it says, if you've got 60 or 70 students in a module, do we have time to do that individually? I think if we're consistently saying, if every student hands in work that isn't referenced properly, that's a failure of teaching rather than a failure of students, isn't it? I can tell you that isn't the case. Having not half a dozen of them. Yeah.
From my experience working in this university briefly and in other universities, because the culture of admitting students, more matured students, is widely experienced now, we are seeing a lot of this cycle because a lot of the matured students came from abroad. And or they went out of education a long time ago and therefore did not come to university with this ethos of good writing.
Yeah.
So right here we have taken a stand where we are designing a short sport workshop and stuff like that on English and academic writing and all that will aim to be giving our students within the first few weeks of their being here.
Yeah.
And this was something I started in a previous university that I was doing as well, and that had made a lot of difference, at least in the other university. And the fact that a lot of students coming abroad came from a system where they're used to writing exams, answer questions, and not aces, is a big deal. And so, unfortunately, a lot of the lecturers don't understand it that way, so they label students as cheating. So, is this communication gap?
Yeah.
So what you're doing here is a good thing. I totally agree. The awareness needs to come from the lecturer side point of view, and this education needs to be for the lecturers as well to understand how to look at these things and the mindset
And if you look at our recruitment policies, and what we say about the university when we recruit people, we don't always necessarily discuss our student body. It's a very difficult thing. How do you discuss that? How do you pick that up in the interview? But it's absolutely key to being successful here in our core role, which is teaching. And it's really tricky, but I don't think we always address that.
It hurts me a lot to hear them talking about foreign students because I'm one of those people, who are misunderstood, who are supposed, we're generally bright people. For people to come here, to have the courage to come to university in England,
To get through
they
the
are really
process.
bright people. It's just helping those people to overcome this initial setbacks and they would fly.
Yeah.
But it's just that nobody can bother to take the time to do that. It's easier to just say they failed, they've cheated.
Yeah.
Just one question, Will. Really old model, or components of the model, but the one thing I'm trying to wrap my head around is, this is implemented in terms of a larger number of students. How do lecturers manage the timing? So if we say that you can submit your work 2 weeks after the deadline, say you have 3,000 students to have, for example, how do you get to manage that? And then the assignments come in trickles.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was, looking over my notes for what I was going to say, reflecting on this and saying, well, okay, what would this look like if we did it differently then? And, we could just try it and see what happens. I don't know. We've got a module, what happens with presentations? We've got assessed presentations, what happens? Well, I think it is rather difficult. My suggestion would be, and I'm trying to think, well, okay, if Kate was here and we're having a conversation, probably what do I think she might say, having read a lot of the stuff, and the things she would say, we have to negotiate it with the students. So, in the case of assessed presentations, say, look, this is what I need, I need it to happen in these couple of weeks, but, let's work together to fit it in and do the timetable. I don't know, clearly there would have to be some boundaries on what we permitted and what we didn't permit. In terms of the regulations, in terms of regulations, I think it'd be really difficult because a lot of things that are said in the regulations we couldn't then do.
But it shouldn't be that we don't. I mean, it's a shame if we don't do it because there must be a way to try it, and I think it's a really interesting one.
But I think there's another layer to this in terms of trust again, in terms of trusting students. We have to be trusted as professionals, and we're not in this institution.
Absolutely, and a lot of the writing that's here, you see a lot of it comes from a website called Hybrid Pedagogy. It's a really interesting website, a lot of very interesting posts on there. A lot of this comes from an American system where the professor has a lot more authority to do things differently.
Who comes on their course? For a start.
And you know, you have people writing there that say, well, actually, I don't do assessments. I don't grade students.
I mean, I trust my students when they don't attend, you know, out with sort of ailments and other things, if they don't attend, that doesn't bother me, you know, out with the obvious. You know, I trust them that, you know, they're adults, they're making a decision, and actually some of them may achieve in spite of me, not even because of me, through non-attending. You know, let's be honest about it. I mean,
well,
there are students who aren't necessarily going to be, you know...
It depends what you mean by cheap, doesn't it?
Okay.
I suspect they would all do better if they'd attended your class.
Oh, I'm sure they wouldn't. So different forms of trust, but then that's what's, you know, part of what I was saying earlier about context. You know, this doesn't operate within a vacuum. I know you're not saying that, and we have to actually sort of be fully cognizant of that, one of which is we are not trusted as staff to be professional, to make these sorts of decisions. However one chooses to make those decisions.
I think I would agree to a certain extent. I think we also operate under an assumption, for example, that in order to operate fair systems for students, we have to treat all our students the same. I would suggest that by going out of our way to treat everybody the same way, what we do is exacerbate the differences that already exist between students.
Well, I think if we are going to have that form of differentiation, which I'm not against, actually, I think then we also need to explain to the other students. There has to be some element of that, because otherwise we would assume possibly that, they will get it, and that's one of the major assumptions that we shouldn't ever make, which is the kind of bedrock of what we're saying, I think, about assumptions and stuff. So I think we would, we need to be mindful of that, because they talk amongst themselves, as they do.
And set up
And it comes back
online
to
and talk online.
So how we frame that conversation without breaking confidentiality and so on is not necessarily easy, but I think that would have to be there. For me, in terms of trust, because otherwise we lose the group.
You're right, but then if I draw on my subject speciality, which is mental health and mental illness, you have to do that with every single patient. Why are they on that tablet and I'm not? Why are they getting therapy and I'm not? Why are they allowed to go have a week in hospital and I can't? And constantly having to explain without breaching confidentiality why they're all treated very differently. And it's a similar kind of thing around education.
I think that's right.
I think one of my reservations, and I think it's great, I'd really like to do this, but it's just, some people actually just need that submission date given to them, because otherwise they don't self-manage, and I'd love to say, everyone's going to be fine, but they just aren't. Some people tell me, in the past when I've given them the opportunity to set a date, if you can't do it, when would you be able to do it? Oh, well, I'm not sure. I think there's just sometimes that motivator, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and that exactly what you described is actually true of me and my supervisor at Middlesex University. It was really supportive. I went through a very messy divorce from sort of arrangements with the children, etc. Really bad time to try and submit my final piece of work. He said, and then eventually he said to me, right, you're going to submit it, and it's going to be on this date. So he did do that for me. That is what was needed. But it was on the context of having been very supportive during a very troubled time, and then realising that is what I needed. If I was going to focus, I wasn't set the date, he had to say, not past that.
So maybe we don't abandon everything, and we just say, actually, let's just take a step and say, we'll have deadlines, but we will know that there is a great deal more flexibility than exists at the moment. Students that come and say, actually, I can't meet this deadline, I can't do my best work for this deadline, can I have an extra week? We'll allow them to manage it in that way, maybe not abandon the idea of the deadline altogether, because I think that would cause all sorts of problems. I mean, if we were going to do anything, it needs a lot of thinking about. We need to talk to a lot of colleagues that aren't here, because people will have a lot of concerns, not least about...
one of them's going to be is if they have trouble talking with students about their performance, then they're going to hate taking all these policies and procedures away.
Absolutely. And some of these things exist for very good reason. Some of them exist because I think they've got some faulty assumptions, but some of them exist for fine reasons.
You will send him by email to us? Yes.
Why not? Yeah. I noticed that our boards of representatives said nothing, so.
Well, I've made notes.
You've made notes.
I'm just expecting...
Will requires retraining on the following.
No, because again, I think when we review the extenuating circumstances policy, I can see exactly who's going to lead it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think it's messed up.
I mean, it's very significant that you started from a position of care, isn't it?
Right.
So if you take somebody like, and I've forgotten his names, I'm getting old now, names just disappeared. Carl Rogers, when he had a dabble in education, he said that every curriculum should start with a blank piece of paper, and you know the student body should create what the curriculum was going to be to help them, and your role was to support them in that. Now, one of the lecturers I highly respected at UEA when he was there wanted to do that because the Nursing and Midwifery Council would never have allowed him, because NMC are very prescriptive about what they want them to cover. But in essence, you know, he was a great believer that he should have started on day one with a blank piece of paper and got them fully engaged. It's a lot more work at the beginning, but in terms of what you're talking about, the trust in the self-managing student and all that kind of stuff is much more likely to happen. And one of my favourite moments, we had a director of education come over from New Zealand, and she was doing, she introduced inquiry-based learning into the university for a short while she was there. And all lectures became voluntary. People turned up if they thought they were worth turning up to. And you saw, amongst my colleagues, some of the classes were getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Others maintain, you know, rather than ask each member of staff how they could increase the number of students turning out, they just went back to, once this director left, making it compulsory that everybody turned up for all lessons because the NMC say so. And that was sad. But in terms of how seriously this trust and this responsibility, when Christine was doing a session that the students had to prepare for with their questions, and they turned up, and she turned up as the subject specialist, and they had to ask her questions. She said, who'd like to ask the first questions? And nobody had any questions, because they were used to the lecturers just giving them a lecture anyway. And she actually said, some of these students had travelled an hour from King's Lynn to Norwich, and she just said, well, if you've got no questions, you obviously know everything that you need to know, so the lesson is finished. And after 5 minutes, it was over. And of course, the students were livid, but they had betrayed the trust, they hadn't been responsible for the bit that they were meant to be responsible.
And I've got a couple of colleagues who've done similar to that. I think I'd struggle, if I'm honest. I would certainly suggest having a look at what Kate Nile does. She's done a very similar thing in terms of co-creating the scheme of work for a module. So she teaches a module, I think, on pedagogy, and for student teachers, and creates that module with them. So they decide for themselves what they're going to look at. She also, I think, teaches in history. So how are we going to investigate and research? A lot of it's at postgraduate level. I mean, I think you need to think about the level that you're doing it at. I think there's a lot of problems with doing that at level 4. You can imagine students that have never been to university on their first day being asked to create the curriculum. That probably wouldn't work. But
although, I mean, obviously, Christine would have argued with that, and she would have used it. For all the lecturers, her first day with us, she said, right, if we were opening a poodle parlour tomorrow, what kind of things would we need to know? And actually, none of us had ever run a poodle parlour, but actually we did a pretty good first day. There is, and then obviously the more you learn about that, the more you then extend it, because that's the nature of learning, of course. So she would have disagreed with you.
Yes, fair enough. But I think the point is, I think at certain levels it will work much more easily.
Oh, absolutely. And with all these things, there will be those that really struggle and those who just excel at it, and our role is still how do we try and keep this fair and equal. Thank you. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we stop this, Andrew?